You've probably seen the headlines screaming in your newsfeed this week, the ones that say something terrifying like common sleep aid linked to heart failure or melatonin supplements could be damaging your heart. It's the kind of news that makes you immediately stop in your tracks, especially if you, like millions of other people, rely on the gentle nudge of a melatonin supplement to finally quiet your mind and drift off to sleep at night. That was the exact intention of these sensationalist headlines, to shock you, to scare you, and most importantly, to make you click. But what if I told you that almost every single one of those headlines is fundamentally, dangerously, and irresponsibly wrong? What if the real story, the one buried deep within the actual scientific data, tells a completely different and far less frightening tale? Welcome, everyone, to a crucial conversation where we separate the alarming fiction from the factual science. Today, we are diving headfirst into that so-called groundbreaking melatonin heart study. And I promise you, by the time we are finished, you will have a crystal clear understanding of what the research actually says, what it absolutely does not say, and most importantly, what you should actually do with this information if you are someone who uses melatonin. This isn't just about getting a good night's sleep. This is about arming yourself with scientific literacy in a world that is desperate to mislead you for clicks and views. The relationship between our health and the media is more fragile than ever, and it is being strained by a constant barrage of misinformation that preys on our deepest fears. There is nothing more primal than the fear for our health, and the idea that something we are doing to help ourselves might secretly be harming us is a narrative that spreads like wildfire. So let's be the fire department today. Let's douse those flames of fear with the cool, clear water of actual data and context. The study causing all this uproar was published in a reputable journal. There's no denying that. But the key to understanding it lies not in the publication's name, but in the intricate and often dry details of its methodology and its limitations, details that journalists and headline writers consistently gloss over because they don't make for an exciting viral story. We are going to examine those details with the patience and precision they deserve. We are going to talk about the difference between association and causation, a cornerstone of scientific understanding that, when ignored, leads directly to the kind of panic we are seeing now. We are going to dissect the study's design, its participant pool, and its very specific findings. This is not about dismissing science, it is about honoring science by interpreting it correctly. So, take a deep breath, put that bottle of melatonin back in the cabinet for now, and let's begin our journey into the heart of this media-manufactured controversy. The truth is not as scary as they want you to think, but it is infinitely more interesting. It's a story of how a single piece of research can be twisted and contorted until it becomes almost unrecognizable from its original form. A cautionary tale for the digital age, where information travels faster than understanding. My goal here is not to tell you what to think, but to show you how to think about scientific news, to give you the tools to be a more discerning consumer of information. This is about empowerment through education, and it starts right now with a closer look at what this study actually was. The research paper at the center of this storm is what is known as an observational study. This is a critical point, one that cannot be overstated. In an observational study, researchers essentially look at a large group of people over a period of time and observe patterns. They collect data on what people are doing, like taking a supplement, and what health outcomes they experience, like developing a heart condition. The crucial thing to understand is that the researchers do not intervene. They do not randomly assign one group to take melatonin and another group to take a placebo, and then watch what happens. That type of study, known as a randomized controlled trial, or RCT, is considered the gold standard for proving that one thing causes another. An observational study, by its very nature, can only show that two things are associated. It cannot prove that one caused the other. This is the classic mantra you hear in epidemiology. Correlation does not equal causation. The melatonin study observed a large database of patients and found that people who were classified as melatonin users had a slightly higher incidence of a certain heart condition. The headlines took that association and ran with it, implicitly suggesting causation. But here is where we must ask the critical questions that the headlines: who were these melatonin users? Why were they taking melatonin in the first place? This is the gateway to the real story. It turns out the individuals in the study who were taking melatonin were not necessarily healthy people just trying to get a better night's sleep. This was not a cohort of well-rested individuals. The data suggests that these users often had pre-existing conditions, were taking other medications, and were potentially dealing with significant stressors or underlying health issues that were the very reason they needed help sleeping in the first place. This is a monumental confounding factor. The study may have been observing the effects of poor health and chronic stress, not the effects of melatonin. Imagine studying the association between walking with a cane and hip fractures. You would find a very strong association. But does using a cane cause hip fractures? Of course not. People who use canes are often already at a higher risk for falls and fractures. The cane is a marker of their underlying vulnerability, not the cause of it. This is a simplistic analogy, but it perfectly illustrates the peril of misinterpreting observational data. The melatonin in this study could very well be the cane, a marker for individuals who are already in a state of health that puts them at a higher risk for cardiovascular issues. Their sleep is disturbed because their body is under duress, and that same duress is what is impacting their heart health. The melatonin is likely an innocent bystander in this entire scenario, caught in the crossfire of a much more complex physiological drama. To blame the melatonin is to miss the entire plot of the story. Let's delve even deeper into the profile of the typical melatonin user, as this is arguably the most important piece of the puzzle that the sensationalist coverage completely missed. When we look at the broader population of people who use sleep aids, including melatonin, we find that this group is not a random sample of the public. They are a self-selecting group with specific characteristics. Often, they are individuals suffering from chronic insomnia, a condition that itself is a known and significant risk factor for a host of cardiovascular problems. Decades of research have conclusively shown that poor sleep quality, short sleep duration, and sleep disorders like insomnia are strongly linked to hypertension, heart disease, stroke, and heart failure. The body's stress response system, the sympathetic nervous system, goes into overdrive when sleep is chronically deficient. Cortisol levels can become dysregulated, inflammation increases throughout the body, and the vascular system endures greater strain. So we have a population of people who, by virtue of their poor sleep, are already on a path toward potential heart issues. They then turn to melatonin as a potential solution. The study in question observed this population and found a correlation between melatonin use and heart problems, but it failed to adequately isolate the effect of the melatonin from the pre-existing powerful effect of the chronic insomnia. It's like seeing a correlation between people who use fire extinguishers and having fire-damaged homes, and then concluding that fire extinguishers cause house fires. The logical flaw is glaring. The underlying issue, the fire, or in our case, the chronic sleep disruption, is the true culprit. The melatonin is the attempted solution, the fire extinguisher. This is called confounding by indication, where the reason for taking the treatment is itself a strong risk factor for the disease being studied. This is a well-known limitation of observational research in pharmacology, and it is a limitation that the authors of the melatonin study likely acknowledged in the fine print of their paper, a section that never makes it into a news headline. Furthermore, the dosage and the quality of the melatonin used in the general population are wild cards that the study could not possibly control for. In many countries, melatonin is sold as an unregulated supplement, not a pharmaceutical. This means the purity, concentration, and actual dosage can vary dramatically from one bottle to the next. What if the individuals in the study were taking excessively high doses, perhaps out of desperation for sleep? What if their supplements contained contaminants? The study's data cannot answer these questions. It simply recorded use versus non use. This lack of granularity makes it impossible to draw any meaningful conclusions about the safety of standard, low dose, high quality melatonin. The conversation is being had on a playing field that is fundamentally unlevel and riddled with unseen variables. The real public health message should not be stop taking melatonin, but rather address the root cause of your sleep problems. The focus on the supplement is a distraction from the much larger and more validated danger, the literally catastrophic health impact of untreated chronic sleep loss. By scaring people away from a potential sleep aid without presenting this crucial context, these headlines may inadvertently be pushing people back toward the very state sleeplessness that is a proven danger to their hearts. The irony is thick and deeply concerning. We are being warned away from a hypothetical, weakly associated risk while being steered back toward a concrete, well established one. This is the danger of incomplete science communication. It creates a scenario where people make health decisions based on fear rather than facts, potentially foregoing a helpful tool because of a misperception of risk. The narrative needs to shift from a simplistic, this is bad, to a more nuanced, this is complex. Understanding that the relationship between sleep, supplements, and health is not a straight line, but a tangled web of cause and effect, pre-existing conditions, and individual behaviors is the first step toward making truly informed decisions for your well-being. It requires more work from us as consumers of information, but the payoff is a life free from unnecessary health anxieties and grounded in a more accurate understanding of how our bodies work. Now, let's talk about melatonin itself, not as a villain in a headline, but as a hormone in your body. This context is vital for understanding why the fear-mongering is so biologically implausible. Melatonin is not some foreign synthetic chemical that your body has never encountered before. It is a natural hormone produced by your pineal gland, a tiny structure in your brain, and its primary role is to regulate your circadian rhythm, your body's internal 24-hour clock. As evening falls and darkness sets in, your pineal gland begins to secrete melatonin, signaling to every cell in your body that it is time to wind down and prepare for sleep. It is the chemical embodiment of nightfall. The melatonin you buy in a bottle is typically a synthetic version of this exact same molecule. When you take it as a supplement, you are essentially giving your body a concentrated signal of nighttime, which can help to advance the timing of your sleep cycle or reinforce your body's own natural sleep-wake signals. This is especially useful for people with circadian rhythm disorders like jet lag or shift work sleep disorder. The key question we have to ask from a physiological standpoint is, does it make sense that this fundamental sleep signaling hormone would directly cause heart damage? The preponderance of evidence from decades of basic scientific research suggests the opposite. In laboratory and animal studies, melatonin has actually been shown to have antioxidant and anti-inflammatory properties. It has been studied for its potential protective effects on the cardiovascular system, with some research indicating it may help to lower blood pressure and reduce oxidative stress in the heart tissue. This is not to say that supplemental melatonin is a heart protective miracle drug. That would be an equally irresponsible overstatement, but it highlights the immense gap between the scary headlines and the established biological science. The idea that a hormone that is intrinsically linked to the body's restorative rest and repair cycle would be inherently toxic to the heart is counterintuitive to its core physiological function. This is not a guarantee of safety, but it is a powerful piece of context. It suggests that if there is any real link between melatonin supplementation and heart issues, it is incredibly complex, likely indirect, and almost certainly not a simple case of the molecule poisoning the heart muscle. Perhaps it involves interactions with specific medications. Maybe it reveals a problem only in individuals with certain genetic predispositions or severe pre-existing heart conditions. The observational study that sparked this panic was not designed to uncover these mechanisms. It was a broad population-level snapshot that identified a pattern requiring further investigation, not a definitive conclusion. The proper scientific response to such a study is not panic and public warning, but curiosity and a call for more targeted, rigorous research. The media's response, however, bypasses all of this nuance. It takes a preliminary signal and amplifies it into a siren, frightening millions and potentially causing them to abandon a helpful tool without consulting their doctor or considering the much greater risk of their untreated insomnia. This is the true cost of bad science journalism. It erodes public trust and prompts health decisions based on alarmism rather than evidence. To truly solidify our understanding, we need to compare this melatonin study to the vast landscape of existing research on the supplement's safety. When we zoom out from this single hyped up paper and look at the entire body of scientific literature, the picture becomes much less alarming. Melatonin has been studied extensively for decades, and its safety profile is generally considered to be quite favorable, especially when compared to prescription sleep medications. Systematic reviews and meta-analyses, which are considered the highest level of evidence because they pool data from many studies, have consistently found that melatonin is well tolerated by most adults. The most commonly reported side effects are mild and transient, such as drowsiness, headache, or dizziness. There is no established evidence from long-term, high-quality randomized controlled trials, the gold standard I mentioned earlier that demonstrates a clear causal link between standard dose melatonin supplementation and serious cardiovascular events. This is the crucial counterpoint that was almost entirely absent from the news coverage. Where are the headlines that say, decades of research confirm general safety of melatonin? They don't exist because safety and the absence of dramatic harm do not drive clicks. Fear does. This creates a massively distorted perception of risk. The public is presented with a single, ambiguous finding that suggests potential harm, while the mountain of consistent, reassuring data is ignored. This is a classic example of what is known as the man bites dog bias in news reporting. A story where a dog bites a man is not news because it's common. But a story where a man bites a dog is news because it's unusual and shocking. In the world of melatonin research, the dog bites man story is that melatonin is generally safe for short-term use. The man bites dog story is this one study suggesting a potential heart risk. Guess which one every news outlet ran with? This creates a false balance in the public's mind, making it seem as if the scientific community is divided on the issue, when in reality, the overwhelming consensus based on the total weight of evidence is still one of a favorable safety profile for the vast majority of users. It is also worth considering the regulatory context. In many European countries, melatonin is a prescription-only medication, meaning its quality and use are monitored. In the United States and Canada, it is an over-the-counter supplement. This difference has led to a much wider and often less informed use in North America, with people sometimes taking inappropriately high doses. The problem may not be melatonin itself, but rather the environment in which it is being used, an environment of self-diagnosis, unregulated products, and a lack of medical guidance. The heart study conducted in this environment may be capturing the risks of this unregulated usage pattern rather than an inherent property of the molecule. The solution then is not a blanket condemnation of melatonin, but a push for more responsible use. Consulting with a doctor, starting with the lowest effective dose, purchasing from reputable brands that undergo third-party testing for purity, and most importantly, using it as part of a comprehensive sleep hygiene strategy rather than as a standalone magic bullet. This nuanced, practical advice is what was truly needed from the media coverage, but it was lost in the frantic scramble to generate fear and engagement. The public was served a platter of anxiety instead of a balanced meal of information and practical guidance. Let's also take a moment to critically examine the specific cardiovascular finding in the study. The research pointed to an increased risk of a particular condition, Without diving into overly complex medical terminology, it's important to understand that the magnitude of the increased risk was quite small. In epidemiological terms, the hazard ratio or relative risk was not a dramatic number. News headlines often present these small increases in relative risk in the most frightening way possible without providing the absolute risk, which is what matters most to an individual. For example, a headline might scream 50% increase in risk. That sounds terrifying. But if the original risk was 2 inches, 10,000 people, a 50% increase brings it to 3 inches, 10,000. The absolute risk increase is just one additional person in 10,000. This is a critical distinction that is almost never communicated in mass media. It's a statistical sleight of hand that makes minor, often clinically insignificant findings appear to be major public health crises. It is highly likely that the increased risk observed in the melatonin study was of this nature, a small, statistically significant, but perhaps not clinically meaningful increase in relative risk that, when stripped of its context, sounds far more dire than it actually is. Furthermore, the study authors themselves would have been the first to include caveats and limitations in their discussion section. They would have written phrases like, "This association requires further investigation. Causality cannot be inferred. Residual confounding may be present. And our findings should be interpreted with caution." These are standard, necessary disclaimers in any credible scientific paper. They are the brakes on the car of scientific discovery, preventing it from careening off a cliff of overinterpretation. The media, however, consistently removes these brakes. It takes the initial tentative finding and accelerates it directly to a definitive sounding conclusion, leaving all the necessary caution and nuance shattered on the road behind it. This does a tremendous disservice to the scientists who did the work, who carefully framed their findings within the proper context of uncertainty. It also betrays the public trust. People rely on journalists to translate complex science accurately. When that translation is done poorly and sensationally, it breeds cynicism, confusion, and a deep-seated mistrust of both science and journalism. People start to feel that you can't believe anything these days, and they are not entirely wrong to feel that way when they are constantly being bombarded with contradictory, fear-based health news. The cycle is vicious. A study is published, it's misreported, it causes a panic, and then a few months later, when follow-up studies fail to replicate the finding or provide a more nuanced explanation, that news receives a tiny fraction of the coverage. The initial fear has already been seeded, and it is incredibly difficult to uproot. The memory of the scary headline lingers long after the quiet correction has been forgotten. So, what is the path forward? How do we, as individuals who care about our health and our sleep, navigate this confusing landscape of conflicting information? The answer is not to swear off all scientific news, but to become more sophisticated consumers of it. The first and most important step is to cultivate a healthy skepticism toward any health headline that seems designed to shock or scare you. If a headline makes your heart drop, that is your cue to pause, not to panic. Remember that the goal of that headline is to get you to click. And fear is the most reliable tool for achieving that goal. The second step is to always look for the original source, or at least for a journalistic outlet that does a good job of linking to it and explaining the study's limitations. Reputable science journalists will always include quotes from independent experts who were not involved in the study, and they will always discuss the study's design, whether it was an observational study or a randomized trial. If an article doesn't mention the type of study it's reporting on, that is a major red flag. The third step is to consider the broader context of existing knowledge. A single study is almost never a revolution. It is a single piece of a very large puzzle. Ask yourself, does this new finding contradict everything we thought we knew? If it does, it should be met with extra skepticism until it is replicated by other researchers. In the case of melatonin, this new heart study is a single contradictory piece that goes against a large body of evidence suggesting safety. It deserves attention in further study, but it does not deserve to overturn the established consensus overnight. The fourth step, and perhaps the most practical, is to talk to a healthcare professional. Your doctor or a sleep specialist understands your personal health history, your risk factors, and the nuances of the scientific literature. They can help you interpret these scary headlines in the context of your own life. They can advise you on whether continuing melatonin is appropriate for you, what dose is sensible, and whether there might be better, more fundamental solutions to your sleep problems, such as cognitive behavioral therapy for insomnia, CBTI, which is considered the first line treatment for chronic insomnia and has no side effects whatsoever. This leads me to the most empowering message of all. Your sleep health is about so much more than a pill, whether it's melatonin or anything else. The foundation of good sleep is what we call sleep hygiene, and it is free, accessible, and entirely within your control. This is the part of the conversation that gets completely drowned out by the supplement scare stories. If you are concerned about the news regarding melatonin, the very best thing you can do is to double down on mastering the basics of sleep. This means prioritizing a consistent sleep schedule, going to bed and waking up at the same time every day, even on weekends. It means ensuring your bedroom is cool, dark, and quiet, a sanctuary for sleep. It means avoiding caffeine and alcohol too close to bedtime. It means putting away the blue light emitting screens, the phones, the tablets, the laptops, at least an hour before you intend to sleep. The blue light from these devices directly suppresses your body's natural production of melatonin, undermining your own innate sleep system. It means getting regular exercise during the day, but not too late in the evening. It means managing stress through techniques like meditation, deep breathing, or journaling. These behavioral strategies are the bedrock of sustainable sleep health. Supplements like melatonin can be a useful tool for specific short-term situations, like overcoming jet lag or adjusting to a new shift work schedule, but they were never meant to be a lifelong crutch that replaces these fundamental practices. The media frenzy around this study provides a perfect opportunity for us to refocus our attention on what truly matters for long-term sleep and health. It's an invitation to move away from a quick fix mentality and toward a more holistic, lifestyle-based approach. This approach is not as sexy as a magic pill, and it won't generate frightening headlines, but it is backed by an immense and unwavering body of evidence. It is the true path to reclaiming your sleep and, by extension, safeguarding your overall health, including your heart health. By focusing on the root causes of your sleep troubles, rather than just masking the symptom of sleeplessness with a supplement, you are addressing the very issue that may have been the true heart risk factor all along. This entire episode is a microcosm of a much larger problem in our modern information ecosystem. We are living in an age of what some experts call the attention economy, where our focus is the most valuable commodity. Media companies, social media platforms, and content creators are all in a fierce battle to capture and hold your attention. And what captures attention more effectively than anything else? Fear, anger, outrage, the feeling that you are in danger. This economic model is fundamentally at odds with the slow, careful, nuanced, and often uncertain process of science. Science advances through a gradual accumulation of knowledge, through peer review, replication, and healthy debate. It is a process that is inherently cautious. The attention economy, on the other hand, demands speed, certainty, and drama. It has no patience for caveats or limitations. This creates a destructive mismatch. Complex scientific findings are stripped of their context, amplified for emotional impact, and hurled into the public sphere where they cause confusion and anxiety. The melatonin heart story is not an isolated incident. We see it with every new food study that seems to flip-flop between something being good for you and bad for you. We saw it dramatically with hydroxychloroquine and ivermectin during the COVID-19 pandemic, where preliminary, low-quality studies were amplified into treatment mandates by certain media and political circles, bypassing the established scientific process entirely. The consequences of that were severe. While the consequences of the melatonin scare may be less dire, likely limited to increased anxiety and poor sleep, for some, the underlying dynamic is the same. It erodes public trust in science itself. When people see scientists and doctors changing their minds or contradicting each other based on these media cycles, they don't understand that this is often a distortion of the scientific process. They start to believe that science is just another opinion, that experts can't be trusted. This is perhaps the most damaging outcome of all. It creates a fertile ground for misinformation and conspiracy theories to thrive. So, what can we do? We must demand better from the media sources we consume. Support journalistic outlets that prioritize accuracy and context over speed and sensationalism. Learn the basic hallmarks of good science reporting. And most importantly, share this critical perspective with others. When you see a friend or family member sharing one of these frightening health headlines, gently encourage them to look deeper. Share the concepts we've discussed today, the difference between observational studies and clinical trials, the importance of absolute risk versus relative risk, the power of confounding factors. By spreading this literacy, we can collectively build a more resilient society, one that is less easily manipulated by fear, and better equipped to make health decisions based on reason, evidence, and a calm, clear-eyed view of the facts. In conclusion, let's bring this all together. The widespread panic over the melatonin heart study is a classic case of media-driven misinformation, a house of fear built on a foundation of misinterpreted data. The study itself was an observational piece of research that identified a small statistical association, not a causal relationship, between melatonin use and a heart condition. This association is far more likely explained by the fact that people who take melatonin often have pre-existing health issues, particularly chronic insomnia, which is a well-documented and powerful risk factor for cardiovascular disease. The melatonin is a marker for the underlying problem, not the cause of a new one. When we look at the entire body of scientific evidence on melatonin, which includes decades of research and rigorous randomized controlled trials, we find a general consensus that it is a safe supplement for short-term use when taken at appropriate doses. The sensationalist headlines ignored this context, bypassed the crucial limitations of the study, and presented a preliminary, ambiguous finding as a definitive public health warning. This has caused unnecessary anxiety for millions and may lead people to abandon a helpful sleep aid without consulting their doctor, potentially driving them back to the proven dangers of chronic sleep deprivation. The real takeaway from this entire episode should not be a fear of melatonin, but a renewed commitment to understanding science better and a focus on the foundational principles of good sleep hygiene. The path to truly protecting your heart and your overall health lies not in fearing a single supplement based on a flawed news report, but in addressing the root causes of your sleep problems, managing stress, maintaining a consistent schedule, and creating an environment conducive to rest. These are the factors that have the greatest and most lasting impact on your well-being. Supplements can be tools in your toolkit, but they should not be the entire foundation of your health strategy. They are meant to supplement a healthy lifestyle, not replace it. This moment is an opportunity for empowerment. It's a chance to take control of your health information diet as much as your nutritional diet. By learning to identify sensationalism, by understanding the basics of how scientific